Concrete shattered like cheap porcelain. Gunfire deafened the tight hospital corridor, tearing through plaster and flesh with indiscriminate malice. Noah dragged his ruined leg behind a medical cart, calculating he had 30 seconds before the hitman finished the job. He was a dead man. Then, a small, trembling woman in scrubs stepped between him and a loaded Glock. 3 deafening cracks. She collapsed against his chest, looked up with terrified, fading eyes, and whispered the most absurd thing he'd ever heard. Tuesdays at 3 in the morning were usually reserved for the forgotten. St. Jude's Memorial Hospital sat on the bruised edge of the city's industrial district, a crumbling brutalist structure that leaked heat in the winter and smelled faintly of ammonia and stale misery year-round. It was the kind of hospital that caught the overflow of human wreckage, the drunks, the desperate, the uninsured. Faye Miller fit right in. She was 25, severely sleep-deprived, and possessed a supernatural ability to blend into the peeling wallpaper. If a patient yelled at her, she apologized. If a doctor snapped for a chart, she handed it over with her eyes glued to the scuffed linoleum floor. She was a ghost in pale blue scrubs. She stood at the nurse's station, mechanically sorting empty vials. The rhythmic squeak of her rubber-soled shoes shifting her weight was the only sound in the ward. Beside her, an old fluorescent bulb flickered, buzzing like a dying wasp. "You're doing it again, Faye," Dr. Aris muttered, barely looking up from his tablet. "Doing what?" she asked. Her voice was thin, a hesitant whisper that sounded like it was constantly asking for permission to exist. "Apologizing to the stapler. You bumped it, it fell. You don't need to tell office supplies you're sorry." Faye felt the heat creep up her neck. "Right, sorry." Aris sighed. "Take your break. It's dead tonight anyway." The universe, predictably, hated that word. Before Faye could unclip her ID badge, the heavy automatic doors of the ER bay didn't just slide open. They were violently rammed off their tracks. Glass spider-webbed and rained onto the floor as a matte black Lincoln Navigator lurched half into the waiting room, its front grille mangled against the admission desk. Silence hung for a fraction of a second. Then chaos erupted. Men poured from the vehicle, 4 of them, dressed in tailored wool coats that were heavy, dark, and ruined. They carried weapons. Not the cheap, flashy handguns the local corner boys brought in on Saturday nights. These were matte, suppressed, professional tools of extreme violence. Faye froze, her lungs seized, trapping the breath in her chest. Dr. Aris backed up slowly, his hands instantly raised, his tablet clattering to the floor. The lone security guard on duty took one look at the tactical rifles and bolted for the fire exit. "We need a doctor," the largest of the men roared. His face was smeared with ash, his voice a gravelly bark that rattled the remaining glass in the window panes. He was practically carrying another man. The man in the center of the huddle wasn't yelling. He wasn't making a sound at all. Noah Moretti walked with a heavy, dragging limp, his arm slung over the giant's shoulder. Even half-conscious and bleeding out over a $3,000 suit, he dominated the room. He had sharp, unforgiving features, hollowed out by exhaustion and pain. His dark eyes flicked across the ER, calculating, assessing, dismissing. He didn't look like a man dying. He looked like a man deciding who was going to die next. "Trauma room 1, the large man barked, dragging Noah past the triage desk. He locked eyes with Dr. Aris. "Move, now." Aris was paralyzed. He was a second-year resident who specialized in prescribing antibiotics for ear infections, not dealing with armed syndicates. I can't, Eris stammered, his hands shaking violently. We don't have the surgical staff on shift. You need to go to General. The giant dropped one hand from Noah's waist, pulled a pistol from his waistband, and leveled it at Eris's forehead. Fix him, or I start redecorating the lobby with your brains. Faye's vision tunneled. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. She wanted to run. Every survival instinct she possessed screamed at her to dive behind the counter, crawl to the locker room, and hide until the police arrived. But then she looked at the wounded man. Noah's dark jacket was soaked through. The crimson stain was spreading rapidly, pooling on the floor beneath his imported leather shoes. His breathing was shallow, his skin taking on a waxy, grayish pallor. Arterial bleed. If someone didn't apply pressure and clamp the vessel in the next 4 minutes, he was going to bleed to death right there on the St. Jude's logo. Her legs moved before her brain gave the order. "Put him on the gurney," a voice said. Faye blinked, startled to realize the voice was hers. It was shaky, terrified, but audible. The giant turned the gun toward her. Faye flinched, shrinking back, her shoulders curling inward. But she didn't run. She pointed a trembling finger toward Trauma Bay 1. You're carrying him wrong. It's tearing the wound track. Put him on the gurney, now." The giant looked at Noah. Noah gave a microscopic nod. They hoisted him onto the stretcher. Faye practically ran to the supply cart. Her hands were shaking so severely she dropped the first pair of latex gloves, leaving them on the floor as she ripped a second pair from the box. "Dr. Aris," Faye said, her voice cracking. I need you to page the on-call surgeon." "No phones," Noah rasped. His voice was shockingly smooth, a low baritone that cut through the panic in the room like a straight razor. "No cops, no records. You are dying," Faye squeaked out, pushing her weight onto a stack of gauze and pressing it violently against his lower abdomen. Noah grunted, his jaw clenching as her small hands dug into his torn flesh. He looked up at her. Really looked at her. He saw a mousy girl with messy brown hair, tied in a frantic bun, pale skin, and eyes wide with absolute unadulterated terror. She looked like she was about to cry, but her hands didn't stop working. "Then I die here," Noah said softly, his eyes locking onto hers. "No surgeons. Fix it, little bird, or my men will burn this place to the ground." Faye swallowed hard. The metallic tang of fear coated her tongue. She grabbed a pair of trauma shears and began cutting away the remnants of his shirt. The sterile lights of Trauma Bay 1 were unforgiving. Faye stood elbow deep in the chaotic reality of a gunshot wound. The bullet had ripped through Noah's side, tearing through muscle and grazing the artery. She had managed to clamp it, stopping the catastrophic blood loss. But the field was a mess. Dr. Aris was standing in the corner, thoroughly useless, hyperventilating into a paper mask. The giant, who Faye learned was named Enzo, stood by the door, assault rifle resting casually against his chest, staring out into the empty hallway. You need anesthesia," Faye murmured, threading a curved needle with trembling fingers. "No," Noah said. He was lying flat on the steel table, his skin glistening with cold sweat. "Stay awake. Keep moving." "I have to suture the muscle wall," Faye said, finally looking up from his side to meet his eyes. It was a mistake. His gaze was too intense, too heavy. It made her want to shrink back into the linoleum. It's going to hurt. A lot. Do it. She took a breath, clamped her jaw, and pushed the needle through his flesh. Noah's body went rigid. The muscles in his arms corded, veins popping against his pale skin. A low, animalistic hiss escaped his teeth, but he didn't pull away. He didn't even close his eyes. He just kept watching her. "You're shaking," he noted. His voice was strained, breathless, but conversational. "You have a gun," Faye whispered, tying off a knot. She didn't mean to say it out loud. The filter between her brain and her mouth was completely dissolved by adrenaline. "Several guns, actually, in my emergency room." "You're terrified." "Yes, but you didn't run with the guard." "I'm a nurse." She cut the suture thread and prepared the next stitch. "Patients don't die on my shift. Not if I can help it." Noah let out a dry, humorless chuckle that ended in a cough of pain. "I'm not a patient, sweetheart. I'm a problem. One you should have walked away from." "Well, I didn't," she muttered, focusing intently on the wound to avoid his gaze. "And I'm not your sweetheart. My name is Faye." "Faye." He tested the name out, the syllables rolling smoothly off his tongue, despite the agony he was in. "Well, Faye, you have a terrible sense of self-preservation." "So I've been told." Outside the bay, the silence of the hospital felt heavy, almost pressurized. Enzo was pacing now. He tapped the earpiece in his right ear, his massive brow furrowing. "Boss," Enzo grunted, stepping into the room. "Radio check from the perimeter team is dead. 2 missed check-ins." The atmosphere in the room snapped tight. The casual banter evaporated. Noah tried to sit up, a grimace ripping across his face as the fresh stitches pulled. "Stay down," Faye ordered, pushing her hands against his good shoulder. It was like pushing against a concrete pillar. "How many?" Noah asked Enzo, ignoring her entirely. "Don't know. If they took out the perimeter, they're professionals. The rival families wouldn't use local talent for this. It's the Russians." Noah swung his legs over the side of the table. Blood immediately began to weep through the fresh bandages. "We move. Now." "You can't walk," Faye pleaded, her panic rising again. "You've lost at least 2 pints of blood. Your blood pressure is tanking. If you stand up, you will pass out." Noah grabbed her wrist. His grip was a vice, hot and slick with sweat. "Listen to me carefully, Faye. The men coming through those doors do not leave witnesses. They will kill the doctor. They will kill you. And they will put a bullet in my head to finish the job. We are leaving this room." Before she could respond, the power cut out. The harsh fluorescent lights died, plunging the hospital into absolute darkness for 3 agonizing seconds. Then, the backup generators kicked in with a dull roar. Faint, amber emergency lights flickered to life in the hallways, casting long, sickly shadows across the floor. A muffled thwip sounded from the lobby, the sound of a suppressed weapon, then the heavy thud of a body hitting the floor. Dr. Aris whimpered in the corner. Enzo racked the bolt of his rifle. "They're in the building." "Secure the hall," Noah ordered, sliding off the table. His knees buckled instantly. Faye caught him. She was 5'4" and weighed barely 120 pounds, but she threw her shoulder under his armpit and braced her stance. The sheer weight of him nearly drove her to the floor, but she held on. "Where to?" she whispered, her voice cracking. "Service elevator," Noah grunted, leaning heavily against her. "Basement, garage." "No," Faye said. The sudden authority in her voice surprised even her. "The service elevators shut down when the backup generators turn on. It's a fire safety protocol. They'll trap us." Noah looked down at her. In the amber emergency light, her face was pale, terrified, but locked in fierce concentration. "Then where, nurse?" "The sterile supply vault. Section D. It's reinforced steel, code access only. It's where we keep the heavy narcotics. It's basically a bunker." Noah nodded once. "Lead the way." They moved out of the trauma bay. The hallway was a ghost town. The air felt thick, heavy with the impending promise of violence. Enzo took the point, his rifle raised, scanning every intersecting corridor. Faye moved as fast as she could, practically dragging Noah's dead weight along the wall. They made it past the pediatric wing, past the shuttered cafeteria. The entrance to Section D was 50 yards away. Then a shadow detached itself from the gloom at the end of the hall. Enzo didn't hesitate. He raised his rifle, but the shadow was faster. 3 suppressed shots echoed. Thwip, thwip, thwip. Enzo jolted backward, his massive frame absorbing the impacts. He managed to fire a short burst from his rifle, chewing up the drywall near the shadow, before collapsing to his knees and pitching forward onto the linoleum. Dead. "Enzo!" Noah snarled, his hand diving to his waistband. He pulled a heavy semi-automatic pistol, but his hand was shaking violently from blood loss. "Keep moving!" Faye cried, pulling him with a desperate surge of adrenaline. She dragged him around the corner, leaving a smeared trail of crimson on the white walls. They crashed through the double doors of Section D. The supply vault was at the end of the short corridor. Faye punched the security code into the keypad with bloody shaking fingers. Beep, 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 beep. The heavy steel door clicked open. She shoved Noah inside and practically fell in after him, slamming the door shut and throwing the manual deadbolt just as footsteps rounded the corner. They were in total darkness. The air smelled of iodine and bleach. Outside, a heavy fist pounded against the steel door. Then silence. Noah slumped against the metal shelving units, his breathing ragged and wet. He fumbled in his pocket and pulled out a silver Zippo lighter. He sparked it. The small, dancing orange flame cast long, frantic shadows across the cramped supply room. Shelves of gauze, saline bags, and locked cages of morphine surrounded them. "They're going to blow the lock," Noah said softly. His voice was losing its commanding edge. He was fading, and he knew it. He checked the magazine of his pistol. 3 rounds left. Faye was backed against the far wall, her knees pulled up to her chest, rocking slightly. She was hyperventilating, the reality of the dead man in the hallway crashing down on her. "I'm going to die," she whispered. Tears were finally spilling over her lashes, cutting clean tracks through the dried blood on her cheeks. "I'm going to die in a supply closet." Noah looked at her. For 10 years, he had lived in a world where human life was a currency, cheaply bought and easily traded. He had watched men beg, cry, and betray their own mothers for a chance to live another day. But looking at this girl, this civilian who had absolutely no business being caught in his war, he felt something cold and heavy settle in his chest. Guilt. It was a foreign, uncomfortable sensation. "Hey," Noah said, his voice dropping to a low, soothing cadence. He slid down the wall until he was sitting on the floor across from her. He held up the lighter. "Look at me, Faye." She shook her head, burying her face in her knees. "Faye, look at me." She slowly lifted her head. Her large, terrified eyes met his. "You aren't going to die," he said, stating it as an absolute fact. "When that door opens, I'm going to put 2 bullets in the first guy. The second guy is going to return fire. I want you to stay down, crawl behind those metal cages, and do not make a sound until the police arrive. Do you understand?" "What about you?" she asked, her voice trembling. Noah offered a grim, blood-stained smile. "I've had on borrowed time for years, little bird. Just keep your head down." Boom! The heavy steel door buckled inward. Dust rained from the ceiling. They had planted a breaching charge on the lock. Noah extinguished the lighter. The room plunged back into pitch blackness. "Down, now!" he hissed. Faye scrambled backward on her hands and knees, wedging herself behind a heavy wire cage filled with IV bags. Her heart was beating so hard she thought it might shatter her ribs. She squeezed her eyes shut and clamped her hands over her ears. Boom! The second charge blew the door completely off its hinges. It crashed into the room, taking out a row of shelves with a deafening clatter of metal and plastic. The amber emergency light from the hallway spilled into the room, cutting through the swirling dust. 2 figures stepped through the threshold, tactical flashlights mounted to their weapons, sweeping the dark corners. Noah fired. 2 deafening explosions filled the small room. The first hitman took a round straight to the throat, a gurgling sound escaping him as he pitched backward into the corridor. The second hitman instantly pivoted, tracking the muzzle flash. He leveled his weapon at Noah's position in the corner. Noah pulled the trigger again. Click. His gun had jammed. Or he had miscounted in his blood-loss haze. It didn't matter. He was out of time. The hitman's flashlight pinned Noah against the wall. The beam was blinding. Noah didn't flinch. He just stared down the barrel of the gun, waiting for the end. From the corner of his eye, a blur of pale blue moved. It made absolutely no sense. It violated every law of self-preservation, every instinct wired into the human brain. But as the hitman squeezed the trigger, Faye Miller, the shy, stuttering nurse who apologized to inanimate objects, threw herself out from behind the wire cage. She didn't try to tackle the man. She was too small, too weak. She simply put herself between the blinding light and her patient. Crack, crack, crack. The noise was absolute. The kinetic force of the bullets hitting Faye's small frame lifted her off her feet. Noah watched in agonizing slow motion. The first bullet struck her right shoulder, spinning her. The second tore through her side. The third caught her square in the chest, right below her collarbone. A sharp, breathless gasp escaped her lips, sounding terribly loud in the ringing silence that followed the gunfire. She collapsed backward, falling directly onto Noah's chest. Noah's mind went entirely, violently blank. The hitman stepped forward, adjusting his aim to finish the job, but the few seconds of delay were all Noah needed. The shock broke. Pure, unadulterated rage flooded his veins, overriding the blood loss, overriding the pain. Noah grabbed the heavy trauma shears Faye had left in his pocket. With a feral roar, he lunged upward, driving the thick steel blades directly into the gap of the hitman's tactical vest, deep into his neck. The man dropped his rifle, clutching his throat as arterial spray painted the wall. He crumpled to the floor, dead before he stopped twitching. The room went deathly still, save for the hum of the backup generator outside. Noah dropped the shears. His hands were trembling wildly now. He fell back to the floor, pulling Faye's limp body into his lap. "No, no, no!" Noah chanted, his hands frantically pressing against her chest, her side, trying to plug the leaking holes. There was so much blood, it was warm and entirely too fast. "Faye, hey, stay with me." Her head rolled back against his arm. Her face was ashen, the color draining from her lips at a terrifying rate. Her eyes fluttered open. The profound, paralyzing terror that had dominated her expression all night was gone. Instead, there was a strange, glassy calm. You stopped bleeding," she whispered, her voice barely a breath of air. "Faye, don't talk. I'm getting you out of here," Noah said, his voice cracking. The ruthless Mafia boss, a man who had watched friends and enemies die without blinking, felt hot tears carving tracks through the ash on his face. He pressed down harder on her chest. She coughed, a thin line of red spilling from the corner of her mouth. Her trembling, blood-soaked hand reached up, her fingers weakly grazing his jawline. "It's okay," she breathed, her eyelids drooping heavily. She offered him a small, fragile, and utterly broken smile. "Don't be afraid. I'm here." Her hand slipped from his jaw, falling limply to the floor. Her eyes closed. "Faye!" Noah roared into the empty room, the sound tearing from his throat like a dying animal. "Faye!" There was no answer, just the ticking of the cooling metal and the slow, steady hum of the emergency lights. The silence in the supply vault was absolute, save for the ragged bubbling sound in Faye's chest. Noah didn't move. He sat on the floor, soaked in the blood of the men he had killed, and the woman dying in his arms, his hands locked in a death grip over her wounds. His brain, usually a hyper-efficient machine built for war, was stuck on a loop. She jumped. She took the bullets. She apologized. Heavy boots pounded against the linoleum in the hallway. Flashlights cut through the dust and smoke. Noah didn't raise his weapon. He didn't have the strength to lift his arm. And he didn't care if it was the Russians coming to finish the job. He wasn't letting go of her chest. "Clear!" a voice barked. Dominic rounded the blown-out doorway. He was dressed in a tailored charcoal suit, an assault rifle pressed tight to his shoulder. Behind him, 3 more men fanned out, securing the corridor. Dominic dropped his weapon so fast it clattered violently against the floorboards and fell to his knees beside Noah. "Jesus Christ, boss," Dominic swore, his eyes darting from the dead hitman with the shears in his neck to the pale, bloodless woman in Noah's lap. "We lost your signal. It took us too long to breach the perimeter." "Medevac," Noah rasped. His vocal cords felt like sandpaper. "Now." "I've got an armored ambulance out back. We need to get you." "Not me," Noah snarled. The sudden burst of volume cost him. His vision swam with black spots, his own untreated gunshot wounds screaming in protest. "Her! Get her on a stretcher. If she dies, Dominic, if she dies on this floor, I will peel the skin from your bones." Dominic didn't argue. He signaled the men in the hall. 2 heavy-set enforcers sprinted in carrying a collapsible tactical stretcher. They didn't ask questions. They moved with the brutal efficiency of men accustomed to cleaning up massacres. "I have to lift her, boss," Dominic said softly, reaching down. "No." Noah swatted his hand away. "I've got pressure on the lung. You lift the board. I stay with her. They maneuvered the stretcher beneath Faye. Noah refused to move his hands from her chest, practically crawling onto the board with her as the men lifted it. The sprint to the loading dock was a blur of flickering emergency lights and the smell of cordite. St. Jude's Memorial was eerily quiet. The staff had either fled or barricaded themselves in the wards. The police sirens were just starting to wail in the far distance, a useless, belated soundtrack to the violence. They burst through the heavy double doors of the loading bay. A matte black, reinforced ambulance idled violently, its rear doors thrown wide open. They loaded the stretcher. Noah dragged his ruined leg up into the cab, refusing Dominic's help. The doors slammed shut. The vehicle lurched forward, tires squealing against the concrete as it tore into the night. Inside the back of the ambulance, a man in a surgical mask immediately began cutting away the rest of Faye's blood-soaked scrubs. "Who is she?" the medic asked, his hands flying over her wounds, slapping occlusive dressings over the chest cavity to stop the lung from collapsing completely. "Her name is Faye," Noah said. He was slumped against the metal wall of the rig, watching the medic's hands. He was fading. The adrenaline was burning off, leaving nothing but cold, hollow shock and the agonizing throb in his side. "She's drowning in her own blood." "We need a chest tube now," the medic muttered, grabbing a scalpel. "Boss, you're bleeding out. Let me pack your side." "Do your job," Noah whispered, his eyes never leaving Faye's face. "Fix her." The medic shoved a plastic tube into Faye's side. A thick rush of dark blood dumped into the plastic suction canister. Faye's body convulsed weakly, her jaw going slack. The heart monitor clipped to her finger let out a high, frantic whine before dropping into a sluggish, irregular beep. "Pressure is tanking," the medic yelled toward the partition. "Step on it." Noah watched the monitor. He watched the erratic green lines spike and dip. He thought about the men he had killed over the last decade. He thought about the power he had amassed, the millions in offshore accounts, the politicians he owned, the empire he built. None of it could buy a single heartbeat. He leaned his head back against the metal wall, the darkness finally rushing in to claim him. Time lost its meaning. It fractured into a series of jagged, disjointed sensory inputs. The smell of heavy bleach, the blinding glare of surgical lamps, the dull, persistent ache in his abdomen. When Noah finally forced his eyes open, he wasn't in a hospital, not a public one anyway. He was lying in a hyper-sterile private recovery suite, located 3 stories beneath a Shell Corporation's high-rise in the financial district. The walls were tinted glass and brushed steel. The sheets were high thread count Egyptian cotton. He ripped the IV from the back of his hand. A monitor protested immediately. Dr. Hale stepped into the room. He was a silver-haired ex-military trauma surgeon who cost Noah $3 million a year to keep on exclusive retainer. "Lie back down, Noah," Hale said, crossing his arms. "I just spent 4 hours digging a 9mm slug out of your oblique muscle and sewing your fascia back together. If you rip those stitches, I'm charging you double." "Where is she?" Noah demanded. His voice was a gravelly ruin. He swung his legs over the side of the bed. The pain hit him like a baseball bat to the ribs, forcing a sharp exhale through his teeth, but he planted his feet on the floor. Hale sighed. He knew better than to physically stop a man like Moretti. "ICU suite, 2 doors down. Is she alive?" "Barely," Hale said. The clinical detachment in his voice grounded the panic rising in Noah's chest. 3 gunshot wounds. The shoulder was clean, in and out. The abdominal shot nicked the liver, but we repaired it. The chest wound was the widowmaker, shattered the clavicle, collapsed the right lung, and missed the subclavian artery by 3 millimeters. She lost massive amounts of blood. But she's alive. She's in a medically induced coma, on a ventilator. Her body suffered catastrophic trauma. Whether she wakes up is entirely up to her. Noah stood. He grabbed a black silk robe off the end of the bed, wrapping it over his bandages, and walked past Hale into the hallway. He found the room. It was dimly lit, dominated by the rhythmic, mechanical hiss of the ventilator, forcing air into Faye's lungs. She looked terrifyingly small in the center of the massive hospital bed. A thick plastic tube protruded from her mouth. Wires snaked across her pale skin, connecting her to a bank of monitors that chirped and hummed. Her messy brown hair, previously tied in that frantic bun, was fanned out across the stark white pillow. Noah pulled a heavy leather armchair to the bedside. He sat down heavily, resting his elbows on his knees, and just looked at her. For 3 days, that was all he did. His syndicate was at war. The hit at St. Jude's had been ordered by a breakaway faction of the Volkov Bratva. The city's underworld was burning. Dominic and Carmine came to the underground clinic twice a day to deliver reports. They spoke in hushed tones about safe houses raided, warehouses burned, and bodies dumped in the river. Noah gave the orders to retaliate with absolute unmerciful prejudice. He ordered men to die, and then he turned back to watch the rise and fall of Faye's chest. It was a sick dichotomy. He was a monster operating in the dark, bathed in the blood of his enemies. And yet he couldn't leave the side of a girl who had apologized to a stapler. Why did she do it? The question haunted him. People in his world took bullets for him because they were paid to, because they were terrified of him, or because they had sworn a blood oath. Faye Miller was making $24 an hour sorting gauze. She didn't know his name. She didn't know his power. She had looked at a gun, looked at him, and decided his life was worth more than hers. He reached out, his large, calloused hand hovering over hers. His knuckles were bruised, a fresh cut healing across his thumb. Her hand was delicate, her skin translucent, marred only by the pulse oximeter taped to her index finger. He gently wrapped his hand around hers. It was cold. "You're an idiot, little bird," Noah murmured to the quiet room. A brave, stupid, beautiful idiot. He hated himself for it. He hated that she was here, breathing through a machine, because he had dragged his violent reality into her quiet life. He ruined everything he touched. That was the fundamental truth of Noah Moretti. He was rot. He was decay. But as he sat there holding her hand, he knew a darker, more selfish truth. He was never going to let her go. She had bought his life with her blood. That made her his. He would tear the city apart to keep her safe, but he would never let her walk away. The ventilator hissed. The monitor beeped. Noah settled deeper into the chair, waiting. Coming back to consciousness wasn't a sudden awakening. It was a slow, agonizing crawl through thick mud. First came the sound. A rhythmic, mechanical sigh. Then came the pain. It wasn't a sharp sting. It was a heavy, crushing weight pressing down on her chest, anchoring her to the mattress. Faye tried to swallow, but her throat was filled with something hard and dry. Panic flared. She tried to open her eyes, but her lids felt like they were sewn shut. She tried to thrash, to pull away from the invasive plastic in her throat, but her arms wouldn't move. They felt leaden, strapped down by invisible weights. Beep, 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 beep. The monitor next to her instantly caught her rising heart rate. "Hey, stop fighting it. Don't move." The voice was low. It rumbled with a quiet authority that cut straight through the fog of her panic. She recognized that voice. It was the voice from the supply closet. A heavy, warm hand rested on her forehead. The touch was incredibly gentle, contrasting sharply with the command in his tone. "Dr. Hale, get in here," the voice called out, louder this time. "She's waking up." Footsteps approached. A penlight shone into her left eye, forcing it open. "Welcome back, Faye," a new voice said, clinical, calm. "You're on a ventilator. I'm going to take the tube out now. It's going to be deeply uncomfortable. You need to cough when I tell you to. Understand?" Faye managed a microscopic nod. "Okay, on 3. 1, 2, 3, cough." She coughed. It felt like her chest wall was being ripped apart with jagged glass. The long plastic tube slid out of her throat, followed by a rush of cold air that made her gag. She gasped, taking her first natural breath in a week. It tasted like iodine and stale copper. "Breathe slow," the clinical voice said. "Oxygen sats are stabilizing. Good. I'll reduce the morphine drip so she stays lucid, but keep her still." The footsteps retreated. The door clicked shut. Faye forced both eyes open. The room was dim, lit only by a sleek, modern floor lamp in the corner. She wasn't in St. Jude's. There were no peeling wallpapers or flickering fluorescent bulbs. The ceiling was smooth. The medical equipment around her looked like it belonged on a spaceship, and the bed felt dangerously soft. She turned her head an inch to the right. Noah Moretti was sitting in a chair beside the bed. He looked different than he had in the trauma bay. The ash and blood were gone. He wore a crisp, dark button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up to his elbows, revealing forearms corded with muscle and faded tattoos. But his eyes were the same, dark, heavy, and intensely focused on her. He looked exhausted. Dark circles shadowed his cheekbones, and a faint stubble lined his jaw. "Where?" Faye started. Her voice was barely a croak, a dry rasp that hurt her throat. Noah immediately stood, pouring a few drops of water from a glass pitcher into a small sponge swab. He leaned over, gently pressing the wet sponge to her cracked lips. The water tasted like heaven. "You're safe," Noah said, pulling the sponge away. He sat back down, leaning his elbows on his knees, his face inches from hers. "You're in a private facility. No police, no records. The men who attacked the hospital are dead. All of them." Faye blinked, her brain struggling to process the information through the heavy narcotic haze. "St. Jude's? Taken care of," Noah said smoothly. "Dr. Aris is fine. The hospital administration received an anonymous, untraceable donation to repair the damages. The police ruled it a gang shootout with no surviving perpetrators." Faye stared at the ceiling. The memories were rushing back. The splintering wood of the door, the blinding flashlight, the deafening sound of gunfire. She remembered the kinetic impact of the bullets, like being hit by a speeding truck. She looked back at him. You, you survived. A strange, humorless smile touched the corner of his mouth. I did, because of you. He paused, the silence in the room stretching tight. I've spent the last 6 days sitting in this chair, trying to figure out a single logical reason why you did it. 6 days, Faye whispered, her eyes widening slightly. You were in a coma. Your lung collapsed. You almost died, Faye. Noah's voice dropped an octave, the gravelly edge returning. Why did you jump in front of the gun? Faye swallowed hard. The pain in her chest flared, a stark reminder of her reality. She looked at this man, this incredibly dangerous, powerful man who was sitting by her bed like a guard dog. You were out of bullets, she said simply. Noah stared at her. He waited for the rest of the explanation. When none came, he frowned. That's it? I was out of bullets, so you decided to be a human shield? You were my patient, Faye muttered, her eyelids growing heavy as the reduced morphine drip finally caught up with her exhaustion. Patients don't die on my shift. I'm not a patient, Noah replied, his voice a low, vibrating murmur in the quiet room. I know, Faye breathed, her eyes sliding shut. You're a problem. A soft, genuine huff of laughter escaped Noah's chest. It was a sound he hadn't made in years. He reached out, his fingers lightly brushing a stray lock of brown hair away from her forehead. Yeah, Noah said softly, watching her chest rise and fall in a steady, independent rhythm. I am, but you're going to have to deal with me for a little while longer, little bird. Get some sleep. Faye didn't hear the last part. She was already drifting back into the dark, but for the first time in her life, the darkness didn't feel lonely. It felt entirely, fiercely protected. Healing is not a graceful process. It is ugly, humiliating, and defined by a lack of dignity. For the next 2 weeks, Faye's world shrank to the dimensions of the private recovery suite. She learned the exact schedule of the fluorescent lights humming in the hallway. She memorized the pattern of the brushed steel ceiling tiles, and she learned to hate the heavy plastic tube lodged between her ribs. Dr. Hale was efficient, but he wasn't gentle. He treated her body like a mechanical engine that needed tuning, devoid of bedside manner. Hold your breath, Hale ordered on a Tuesday morning. He stood beside her bed, a pair of heavy forceps in his gloved hands, gripping the end of the chest tube. Faye gripped the bed rails, her knuckles turned white. She drew a shallow, rattling breath and held it. Hale pulled. It felt like a snake covered in barbed wire was being dragged out of her chest cavity. A raw, animalistic sound tore from Faye's throat, a breathless scream that ended in a violent, hacking cough. Tears streamed hot and fast down her cheeks as her body curled inward, instantly trying to protect the violated space. A hand caught her shoulder, heavy and warm, keeping her from curling too far and ripping her fresh sutures. Easy, Noah said. He was standing on the other side of the bed. He hadn't left the room since she woke up. He slept in the leather armchair. He ate his meals off the sterile metal tray table. It's over. Just breathe. Faye gasped, tasting copper. She turned her face into the pillow, hiding her tears. She hated crying in front of him. She hated being weak. Suturing the site, Hale muttered, completely unfazed by her obvious agony. He worked quickly, pulling the skin tight and tying off the knots. She'll need aggressive spirometry to keep the lung expanding. If she gets lazy with her breathing exercises, pneumonia will set in. In her current state, pneumonia is a death sentence. She won't get lazy, Noah said flatly. His eyes never left Faye's trembling frame. Hale packed his instruments and left the room. The heavy door clicked shut, leaving the heavy silence behind. Faye slowly rolled onto her back, exhausted by the sheer effort of existing. She looked at Noah. He was back in his chair, a tablet resting on his knee. He looked like a man reading the morning news, but she knew better. Over the last 14 days, she had watched the Mafia boss run his empire from her bedside. It was terrifyingly quiet. Men in tailored suits, mostly Dominic and a few others whose names she didn't know, would slip into the room, hand Noah encrypted phones, and whisper in his ear. Noah would nod, or shake his head, or speak a single sentence. "Burn the warehouse. Leave the trucks. Tell the Volkovs their lieutenant is in the river. If he talks to the feds again, cut out his tongue." He said these things in the same even, baritone voice he used to ask her if she wanted water. He didn't hide his monster from her. He didn't try to soften the reality of who he was or what he did. "You're staring," Noah noted, not looking up from his tablet. "You ordered a man's tongue cut out yesterday," Faye said. Her voice was stronger now, though it still held a raspy edge from the intubation. Noah slowly lowered the tablet. He met her gaze. His dark eyes were unreadable, twin pools of obsidian. "I did. And then you helped me to the bathroom so I could throw up." "I did," Faye shifted, wincing as her collarbone throbbed. "Do you see how that's difficult for me to reconcile?" Noah set the tablet on the side table. He leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees. "I don't expect you to reconcile it, Faye. You belong to the world above ground. You save lives. I operate in the dirt. I end them. The man I gave the order about, he sold out 3 of my men to a rival syndicate. Those men were tortured for 2 days before they died. Taking his tongue was mercy." "There is no mercy in this room," she whispered, looking at the ceiling. "Just survival. That's the only rule that matters." Noah stood up. He walked to the edge of her bed, his large frame blocking out the glare of the floor lamp. "You survived. You bought your life with 3 bullets. But you need to understand something, little bird." Faye looked at him. The air in the room felt suddenly heavier. "The world you knew before St. Jude's is gone," Noah said quietly. There was no malice in his voice, only cold, hard fact. "The Volkovs are bleeding, but they aren't dead. They know a nurse was in the trauma bay. They know she left with me. If they find you, they will use you to get to me. They will peel you apart to make me watch." Faye's breath hitched. The reality of her situation, which she had been holding at arm's length with the morphine and the pain, came crashing down on her chest. "I have an apartment," she said, her voice shaking. "I have a cat. I have rent due next week." "Your lease was paid in full and terminated," Noah said. "Your belongings are in storage. Dominic took the cat to a no-kill shelter in the suburbs, fully funded." Faye stared at him. The sheer audacity of it left her speechless for 3 agonizing seconds. Then the anger hit. It bypassed the fear, bypassed the pain, and flared hot in her chest. "You erased me!" she hissed, pushing herself up on her good elbow. The monitor beside the bed began to chime an alarm at her spiking heart rate. "You didn't even ask. You just wiped my life away. I kept you breathing, Noah fired back, his voice rising just a fraction, a dangerous rumble that warned her to back down. I didn't ask to be your prisoner, she yelled, instantly gasping and clutching her chest as the torn muscle screamed in protest. She fell back against the pillows, panting, tears of sheer frustration burning her eyes. I saved your life, and you took mine. Noah stood perfectly still, his jaw clenched so tight the muscles ticked beneath his skin. He looked at her frail, broken body, trembling with rage on the pristine sheets. He took a step back, the physical distance a concession he rarely gave anyone. I didn't make you a prisoner, Faye, he said softly, the lethal edge entirely gone from his voice. I made you a ghost. It's the only way you get to stay alive. He turned and walked toward the door. Where are you going? She asked, hating the slight panic that laced her tone. She hated him right now, but the thought of him leaving the room terrified her more. Noah paused with his hand on a heavy steel handle. He looked back over his shoulder. To find a way to fix this, he said, and then he walked out. 3 weeks later, Dr. Hale signed her discharge papers. Faye was still incredibly weak. She moved with a slow, deliberate caution, her right arm strapped into a sling to protect the shattered collarbone, her torso wrapped tightly in medical binders. But she could walk. She could breathe on her own. She was technically healed. Dominic drove the armored SUV. The glass was thick and heavily tinted, turning the bright morning sun of the city into a muted, muddy gray. Faye sat in the back, staring out the window. She watched the pedestrians hurrying down the sidewalks with their coffees and briefcases. They looked like aliens to her. They existed in a world where a car backfiring was just a car backfiring, not a suppressed rifle shot. She pressed her forehead against the cold glass, feeling a profound sense of isolation. Noah sat beside her. He took up too much space. He didn't speak. He just emanated a heavy, gravitational pull that made it impossible to forget he was there. They left the city behind. The concrete towers gave way to winding coastal roads, bordered by ancient pines and sheer cliffs, dropping off into the turbulent ocean. The SUV slowed, turning down a private, unmarked road. Heavy iron gates swung open automatically, revealing a sprawling, modern compound built of dark stone and floor-to-ceiling glass, perched on the edge of the cliffs. It looked like a fortress disguised as an Architectural Digest cover. Welcome to the estate, Dominic said cheerfully from the front seat, trying to cut the suffocating tension in the vehicle. Nobody answered him. The car parked. Dominic opened Faye's door, offering a hand to help her step down. She ignored it, gritting her teeth as she slid off the leather seat. Her side ached fiercely, a dull, pulsing reminder of the missing liver tissue. Noah walked past her, his own limp barely noticeable now. He didn't wait for her, simply expecting her to follow. The inside of the house was vast, cold, and impeccably clean. It smelled like expensive cedar and ozone. There were no photographs on the walls, no clutter, no signs of life. It was a beautiful, sterile cage. Dominic will show you to your room, Noah said, finally turning to face her in the massive foyer. There are clothes in the closet. The kitchen is fully stocked. Do not go past the tree line in the backyard. The perimeter is rigged with motion sensors and armed guards. If you wander, they will treat you as a hostile. Faye looked around the cavernous space. And what am I supposed to do here? recover. For how long? Noah's dark eyes locked onto hers. Until the Volkovs are entirely eradicated. Until there is no one left breathing who knows what happened at St. Jude's. That could take years. Then it takes years. Faye felt a hysterical laugh bubble up in her throat. She swallowed it down. I'm a nurse, Noah. I work 12-hour shifts. I live on my feet. I can't just sit in a glass house and stare at the ocean until you decide it's safe for me to exist again. Noah took a slow, deliberate step toward her. The distance vanished. She had to tilt her head back to look at him. You jumped in front of 3 bullets for me, he said, his voice dropping to that low, dangerous murmur that made her stomach flip. You bled out on a linoleum floor. You spent a week on a ventilator. You don't get to tell me that you're bored, Faye. You're alive. That's enough. It's not enough, she snapped, the sudden volume surprising them both. She didn't shrink back. She didn't apologize to the air. The shy girl who sorted vials at 3 a.m. had died in that supply closet. The woman standing in the foyer was forged from trauma and survival. Being kept in a box isn't living. It's just waiting to die. Noah stared at her. He looked at the fierce defiance burning in her pale face. He looked at the ugly medical binder peeking out from beneath her oversized sweater. He slowly reached up, his fingers brushing the collar of her sweater aside to trace the edge of the thick bandage covering her collarbone. His touch was feather-light, entirely at odds with the violence he was capable of. You think I want this? He whispered. His eyes searched hers, dropping his guard for a fraction of a second. You think I want to look at you and be reminded every single day that you broke yourself to save a man who didn't deserve it? Faye held her breath. Her anger faltered, cracking against the raw, unexpected vulnerability in his voice. Noah dropped his hand. He stepped back, the invisible armor sliding instantly back into place. Your room is upstairs, first door on the right. Dinner is at 8. He turned and walked down the long hallway, disappearing behind a set of heavy oak doors. For the next 2 months, they lived in a strange, silent orbit. Faye healed. She forced herself to walk the length of the massive living room, pushing through the pain until the limp faded. She spent hours standing on the back terrace, watching the cold gray ocean crash against the rocks below. Noah was a phantom. He left the compound before she woke up and returned long after she went to bed. She only knew he was there because she would find her coffee mug washed in the sink, or a new book resting on the side table next to her reading chair. He was waging a war in the city. She saw it on the news. Unexplained fires in the industrial district. A prominent shipping executive found dead in his car. The anchor on the television called it a surge in organized crime violence. Faye knew it was Noah, systematically dismantling the people who threatened her existence. The guilt was a heavy, suffocating blanket. Men were dying because she couldn't go back to her apartment. One night in late October, a violent thunderstorm rolled in off the coast. The rain lashed against the floor-to-ceiling windows, and thunder rattled the expensive art on the walls. Faye couldn't sleep. The thunder sounded too much like the breaching charges at the hospital. She walked downstairs, wrapping a thick cardigan around her shoulders. The house was pitch black, save for a warm amber glow spilling from the half-open door of Noah's study. She pushed the door open. Noah was sitting behind a massive mahogany desk. A crystal glass of amber liquid sat untouched next to a stack of dossiers. He had his shirt off. Faye froze. His torso was a roadmap of violence. Scars crisscrossed his skin, jagged lines from knives, round puckers from old bullet wounds, and the angry, pink healing line of the fresh surgical incision on his side, mirroring her own. He wasn't looking at the papers. He was staring blindly into the fireplace. He looked exhausted. He looked completely, fundamentally broken. "I didn't mean to intrude," Faye said softly, stepping backward. Noah didn't jump. He didn't cover up. He just slowly turned his head to look at her. "You aren't intruding. Come here." Faye hesitated, then walked slowly into the room. The fire crackled, casting dancing shadows over his ruined skin. She stopped beside his desk. "You're awake," he noted, his voice rough. "The thunder," she said, simply. Noah nodded. He understood. He reached out and poured a second glass of bourbon, sliding it across the desk toward her. "Drink it. It helps the ghosts sleep." She took the glass. The liquor burned her throat, but it settled warm in her stomach. "It's almost over," Noah said, staring into the flames. "The head of the Volkov family was taken care of tonight. The rest of the faction is scattering. By next week, the city will be quiet again." Faye gripped the glass tightly. "And then what?" Noah finally looked up at her. "And then I give you what you want. I have a new identity prepared for you. Passports, a bank account with enough money to live comfortably for the rest of your life. A house in a quiet town in Maine. You'll be safe. You'll be free." Faye felt the floor drop out from under her. It was exactly what she had yelled at him for in the foyer 2 months ago. It was her freedom. So why did it feel like a death sentence? "You're sending me away," she whispered. Noah stood up. He walked around the desk, stopping mere inches from her. The heat radiating off his bare chest was palpable. "I'm setting you loose, Faye. I drag everything into the dark with me. I ruin it. Look at you. You have scars that will never fade because you stood next to me for 10 minutes. I will not let my life become your permanent reality." Faye looked up at him. She looked at the hardened Mafia boss, the killer, the monster. And then she reached out. Her small, pale hand pressed flat against his chest, right over his heart. He flinched, a microscopic jerk of surprise, but he didn't pull away. His heartbeat was steady, heavy against her palm. "I'm already ruined, Noah," she said softly, her voice steady. "The girl who apologized to Staplers is dead. I don't want a quiet town in Maine. I don't want to pretend none of this happened." Noah's hand came up, wrapping around her wrist. His grip was tight, desperate. "Faye, do not do this. Do not choose this life. Do not choose me. Because if you stay, if you ask to stay, I will never, ever let you leave." Faye stepped closer, closing the final inch between them. She looked up into his eyes, stripping away the fear, the hesitation, and the cynicism. She saw the absolute terrifying truth. He was a monster, but he was her monster. "Then lock the door," she whispered. The transition wasn't cinematic. There were no sweeping declarations of love under the moonlight, no sudden, magical erasure of their trauma. Faye staying meant stepping fully into the brutal, paranoid reality of Noah Moretti's world. The first week after she refused the tickets to Maine, the atmosphere in the estate shifted. The invisible wall Noah had kept between them shattered. He stopped leaving before dawn and returning at midnight. He began running the syndicate from the heavily fortified study on the ground floor, and for the first time, he let her stay in the room. Faye sat on the leather sofa by the window, reading medical journals, while Noah and Dominic discussed extortion, supply lines, and bribes. She didn't offer opinions. She didn't flinch when the conversations turned violent. She simply existed in the space. A quiet, grounding anchor in a sea of chaos. "They want a 20% cut on the docks," Dominic said one Tuesday afternoon, pacing the length of the Persian rug. "It's insulting. We should sink their boats tonight to send a message." Noah sat behind the desk, rubbing his temples. The war with the Volkovs was over, but the vacuum of power had emboldened the smaller gangs. Sinking boats draws the Coast Guard. The Coast Guard draws the feds. I'm not bringing federal heat down on our heads over 20% of a smuggling route. "So we pay them?" Dominic asked, appalled. "No," Noah said softly. "We find out who the harbor master's mistress is, and we buy her. Then we own the court, and we freeze them out entirely. No blood, just leverage." Dominic grinned. "I'll get Carmine on it." He paused, looking over at Faye, who was casually turning the page of a textbook on advanced cardiovascular surgery. Dominic still looked entirely unnerved by her presence during these meetings. He cleared his throat. Miss Miller, do you need anything? Coffee?" Faye didn't look up from her book. "I'm fine, Dominic. Thank you. And please, tell Carmine to be careful. The harbor master has a documented history of domestic violence. His mistress might be volatile." Dominic blinked, stunned. He looked at Noah. Noah was staring at Faye, a slow, deeply unsettling smirk spreading across his face. "You heard her, Dom. Tell Carmine to watch his back." Dominic nodded quickly and practically fled the room. When the heavy door clicked shut, Noah leaned back in his leather chair. "You read the dossier I left on the coffee table." Faye finally closed the textbook, setting it aside. "You left it next to my tea. I assumed you wanted an outside perspective." She stood up, smoothing the front of her dark slacks. Her movements were fluid now. The physical therapy had erased the stiffness, leaving only a faint ache when it rained. She walked over to the desk, leaning her hip against the heavy mahogany edge. "You're adapting too well," Noah noted, his eyes tracking her movement. He reached out, his large hand wrapping around her waist, pulling her effortlessly onto his lap. Faye gasped softly at the sudden movement, but she didn't resist. She settled across his thighs, looping her arms casually around his neck. The physical proximity between them was no longer electric with panic. It was electric with a deep, territorial possession. "I'm a nurse," Faye said, her fingers lightly tracing the strong line of his jaw. "My job is to assess a chaotic environment, triage the problems, and stabilize the patient. Your world is just one massive, bleeding trauma wall." Noah's hand slid up her back, resting heavily between her shoulder blades, right over the faded scar from the third bullet. He hated touching the scars, but he did it constantly, a morbid grounding technique to remind himself that she had survived. "And what's your assessment of me?" he murmured, his voice dropping into that dark, gravelly register that sent a shiver down her spine. "You're a terrible patient," she replied, leaning in until her breath ghosted across his lips. "You refuse to rest. You have a God complex, and your coping mechanisms involve exorbitant amounts of property damage." "Accurate," Noah agreed. He tilted his head, closing the distance, and pressed his mouth to hers. It wasn't a gentle kiss. There was nothing gentle about Noah Moretti. It was consuming, bruising and desperate. He kissed her like a man starving, pulling her tighter against his chest until she could feel the heavy, erratic thud of his heart against her own. Faye responded in kind, her hands tangling in his dark hair. She didn't want gentle. She had spent 25 years being gentle, being quiet, being a ghost. In Noah's arms, she was intensely, violently alive. When he finally pulled away, they were both breathing heavily. Noah rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed. Carmine found a facility downtown, Noah said, quietly, the business edge returning to his tone. An old private clinic that went bankrupt. The syndicate bought the building through a shell corporation this morning. Faye pulled back slightly, frowning in confusion. Why? Noah opened his eyes. They were dark, entirely serious. Because my men keep getting shot, and I can't keep kidnapping civilian doctors to stitch them up. The basement of that high-rise is compromised. We need a dedicated, off-the-books trauma center. Faye stared at him, her brain slowly catching up to what he was saying. You bought a hospital. I bought a building, Noah corrected. I need someone to build the hospital, to stock it, to hire discreet staff, to run it. The silence stretched in the study. The grandfather clock in the corner ticked heavily. Faye looked at this man. He had offered her a quiet life in Maine, and she had rejected it. So instead, he had gone out and bought her a war zone where she could thrive. He was giving her purpose within his darkness. He was giving her back her identity, twisted perfectly to fit into his world. I'll need a massive budget for sterile processing equipment, Faye said, her voice deadpan, though a fierce, brilliant light had ignited in her eyes. And I'm not using Dr. Hale as head of surgery. He has the bedside manner of a brick. Noah let out a loud, genuine laugh. It was a rich, chest-deep sound that made the room feel instantly warmer. He pulled her back against his chest, burying his face in the crook of her neck. Whatever you need, little bird, he murmured against her skin. It's yours. Faye closed her eyes, resting her head on his shoulder. She listened to the rain lashing against the fortified glass of the study. Outside these walls, the city was a brutal, unforgiving machine. Men like Noah ran the gears, crushing whoever got in their way. She had taken 3 bullets for a monster. She traced the edge of the scar on his neck, right where she had stabbed the hitman with the trauma shears. She wasn't afraid of the dark anymore. Not when the biggest shadow in the room belonged to her. I know, Faye whispered into the quiet room. I know it is. If this gritty, intense Mafia romance kept you hooked until the very last word, hit that like button and drop a comment, letting us know your favorite moment between Noah and Faye. Do you think Faye can handle running an underground mob hospital? Share this story with your friends who love dark romance, and make sure to subscribe to the channel for more deeply emotional, action-packed series. We have more thrilling stories coming your way, so ring that bell icon to never miss an upload. See you in the next one.